IBM Cloud faces fourth outage since May. What CIOs need to know. IBM Cloud suffered another significant service disruption, leaving enterprise customers locked out of critical resources for over 2 hours, making it the fourth major outage since May. IBM Cloud's recurring authentication and login failures are not isolated application layer events. They are symptoms of a systemic control plane fragility that undermines the very promise of cloud resilience, said Sanchit Gogia, CEO and Chief Analyst at Greyhound Research. However, repeated control plane failures undermine this strategic positioning. IBM Cloud's positioning as a hybrid leader assumes an inherent resilience advantage over hyperscalers. Yet the reality is that platform-level control plane failures in quick succession directly contradict that perception, Gogia observed. The analyst noted that hybrid architectures lose their resilience advantage when core governance functions like identity management, DNS, and monitoring systems become globally entangled single points of failure. Gogia recommended that enterprises procure the control plane with the same rigor as the compute and storage tiers, demanding documented fault domains, explicit SLAs for console and API responsiveness, and out-of-band administrative access methods. He advocated for multi-control plane architecture, ensuring that a management layer failure in one provider cannot halt operations across critical workloads, moving beyond traditional multi-cloud strategies that distribute workloads but leave orchestration concentrated with a single vendor. As quoted in Network World, in an article authored by Gyana Swain published on August 12, 2025. Beyond the media quote, our view in full. Pressed for time? You can focus solely on the Greyhound flashpoints that follow. Each one distills the full analysis into a sharp, executive-ready takeaway, combining our official standpoint, validated through Pulse data from ongoing CXO trackers, and grounded in field notes from real-world advisory engagements. IBM Cloud outages reveal control plane entanglement and the limits of regional isolation. Greyhound flashpoint. IBM Cloud's recurring authentication and login failures are not isolated application layer events. They're symptoms of a systemic control plane fragility that undermines the very promise of cloud resilience. The June 5, 2025 incident affected at least 54 core services, spanning virtual private cloud, VPC, DNS, IAM, monitoring, and even the support portal, rendering customers unable to file tickets while workloads remain theoretically up. A subsequent outage within weeks reinforced the pattern. Globally shared control plane services, particularly IAM and DNS, became single points of failure, breaching the assumption that workloads in separate regions can be operated independently. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 54% of CIOs now list control plane resilience as a top 3 selection criterion for cloud providers, second only to compliance. These failures underscore that uptime SLAs, without management layer guarantees, are an incomplete measure of service reliability. Greyhound standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, enterprises need to procure the control plane with the same rigor as the compute and storage tiers. The control plane, the orchestration brain that governs authentication, provisioning, DNS resolution, and operational visibility, must be architected with fault domains, dependency segmentation, and out-of-band access pathways. Outages have shown that when globally shared IAM and orchestration APIs fail, region isolation can be meaningless in practice. Buyers should demand documented fault domains for the control plane that show how IAM, DNS, and orchestration services are region-scoped or segmented. They should require explicit SLAs that cover console and API responsiveness in addition to compute availability. They must insist on region-scope telemetry for control plane components so that degradation can be detected before it becomes platform-wide. They should secure out-of-band administrative access, such as CLI or bastion host break glass methods, and test them quarterly in joint failover drills. They should also negotiate penalty clauses tied to control plane failures that are measured in governance downtime, not just workload downtime. Without these safeguards, a minor API or token refresh issue can cascade into a complete operational blind spot, even when workloads themselves remain healthy. Greyhound Pulse. Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025 shows that 61% of enterprises now embed control plane availability terms in cloud contracts, up from 42% in 2023. Of those that have conducted formal audits, 62% found single region dependencies for authentication and configuration APIs. Industries with strict operational continuity mandates, such as BFSI, healthcare, and critical infrastructure, are leading this trend, adding contractual requirements for regional segmentation of identity services and auditable failover of DNS and orchestration layers. Importantly, 39% of CIOs report scoring access continuity, which includes login, token issuance, and orchestration APIs as a separate metric alongside data durability, recognizing that the ability to operate the workloads is as critical as the ability to store or run them. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note from a large European financial institution, a simulated control plane failure in a public cloud environment was deliberately triggered to test readiness. Within minutes, operational teams lost the ability to authenticate, update configurations, or access monitoring data, even though workloads continued to run. The dry run exposed gaps in both procedural runbooks and contractual guarantees, including the absence of break glass credentials stored in a separate trust domain and no pre-approved governance workflows to bypass console dependency. Following the exercise, leadership mandated quarterly failure simulations across all cloud partners, with penalty clauses tied to the inability to maintain governance functions during an outage scenario. Hybrid leadership narratives require control plane discipline. 2 failures in weeks accelerate confidence erosion. Greyhound Flashpoint. IBM Cloud's positioning as a hybrid leader assumes an inherent resilience advantage over hyperscalers. Yet the reality is that 2 platform-level control plane failures in quick succession, the latter impacting 54+ services and cutting off access to the support portal, directly contradict that perception. Hybrid breadth does not equate to hybrid continuity when core governance functions, such as IAM, DNS, and monitoring, are globally entangled. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 48% of enterprises downgrade vendor confidence after 2 or more high-impact incidents in a 12-month period. In regulated sectors, the threshold for triggering formal vendor review is often 3 incidents in 18 months, particularly if they involve loss of governance access. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, a hybrid-first positioning can only maintain credibility if the control plane architecture is demonstrably resilient. This requires fault domain proofs, transparent status communication, and tangible architectural changes that show segmentation of IAM gateways, decoupling of DNS, and isolation of monitoring systems. Hybrid buyers are increasingly asking whether their chosen architecture genuinely delivers more resilience than single cloud alternatives. Without hard evidence, even providers with differentiated positioning risk encountering resistance from risk-conscious sectors such as healthcare, BFSI, and government, where board-level charters encode reassessment triggers for access layer failures regardless of workload uptime. Greyhound Pulse. In the past 2 years, 31% of enterprises have formally reviewed their hybrid cloud strategies due to concerns about service availability. In regulated industries, 44% have initiated competitive RFPs after 3 major service interruptions within 18 months. Control plane-specific events, including login, token refresh, and console or API access failures, provoke stronger responses than comparable data plane downtime. CIOs are now placing greater emphasis on time to restore governance, which measures the hours until login, telemetry, and change control are restored as a more decisive retention factor than total incident duration. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note from a North American healthcare network, a tabletop simulation was conducted to model a control plane outage across its hybrid cloud providers. The exercise revealed that while workloads could be failed over between public and private cloud environments, the lack of centralized governance access delayed remediation and compliance approvals by several hours. In the postmortem, the CIO's team prioritized the implementation of secondary governance channels, the integration of out-of-band authentication methods, and the inclusion of control plane availability SLAs in all vendor contracts. The board subsequently mandated that any provider unable to meet these criteria would be subject to competitive review within the next procurement cycle. Beyond multi-cloud. Architecting for multi-control plane resilience with managed complexity. Greyhound Flashpoint. Conventional multi-cloud strategies distribute workloads but leave orchestration concentrated in a single vendor's control plane. True resilience requires multi-control plane architecture, ensuring that a management layer failure in one provider cannot halt operations across critical workloads. Per Greyhound CIO Pulse 2025, 57% of CIOs plan to deploy such patterns by 2027. Among early adopters, outage-related downtime has been reduced by 46% compared to single control plane environments. However, operational maturity remains low, with just 28% feeling confident managing multiple management interfaces without introducing prohibitive overhead. Greyhound Standpoint. According to Greyhound Research, The pragmatic approach is control plane independence with complexity guardrails. This means hosting a secondary orchestration tier in a separate fault domain, implementing hardened out-of-band administrative methods, standardizing on portable identity and infrastructure abstractions, and retaining provider-native optimizations where they matter most. It also means running failover drills that simulate console or API unavailability for sustained periods to prove that operational teams can execute essential workflows under degraded conditions. Without these safeguards, organizations risk replacing single-vendor lock-in with single-vendor fragility at the orchestration layer, the very vulnerability recent outages have made visible. Greyhound Pulse. Industries such as finance and aviation are leading in multi-control plane maturity by implementing region-scoped IAM, segmented DNS resolvers, and quota-guarded self-healing routines to avoid cascading automation failures. These sectors now define control plane KPIs in their runbooks, monitoring metrics such as login latency, token error rates, and API success rates per region, and mandating that vendors provide real-time telemetry through contractual dashboards. This shift reflects a growing awareness that the management layer's performance is integral to SLA compliance, governance continuity, and incident containment. Greyhound Field Note. Per a recent Greyhound Field Note from an Asia-Pacific transportation enterprise, a red team exercise was conducted to simulate a control plane outage at the primary cloud provider. The test involved disabling console access, authentication services, and orchestration APIs while leaving workloads operational. The results showed that critical business operations continued without interruption because a secondary orchestration platform in a sovereign private cloud was able to execute pre-approved workflows and access securely stored credentials. Out-of-band CLI methods were used for change management, allowing teams to bypass the console entirely. While the arrangement required dual-skilled engineering teams and continuous cross-platform testing, leadership concluded that the operational sovereignty gained far outweighed the additional complexity and cost. Analyst in focus, Sanchit Gogia. Sanchit Gogia, or SVG as he is popularly known, is a globally recognized technology analyst, innovation strategist, digital consultant, and board advisor. SVG is the chief analyst, founder and CEO of Greyhound Research, a global, award-winning technology research, advisory, consulting, and education firm. Greyhound Research works closely with global organizations, their CXOs, and the board of directors on technology and digital transformation decisions. SVG is also the founder and CEO of the House of Greyhound, an eclectic venture focusing on interdisciplinary innovation. Copyright policy. All content contained on the Greyhound Research website is protected by copyright law and may not be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, displayed, published, or broadcast without the prior written permission of Greyhound Research, or, in the case of third-party materials, the prior written consent of the copyright owner of that content. You may not alter, delete, obscure, or conceal any trademark, copyright, or other notice appearing in any Greyhound Research content. We request our readers not to copy Greyhound Research content and not republish or redistribute them, in whole or partially, via emails or republishing them in any media, including websites, newsletters, or intranets. We understand that you may want to share this content with others, so we've added tools under each content piece that allow you to share the content. If you have any questions, please get in touch with our community relations team at connect@thoffer.com.